All right, it is 5:30. I'm going to start, and if people come in the middle, that's fine. My name is Jennifer Gallagher, and I am a librarian here with the Maricopa County Library District. I really appreciate those who have joined. We are very passionate about citizen science here at the Maricopa County Library District. You'll be seeing a lot of opportunities as Citizen Science Month approaches in April. And we have lots of materials available, books and other options for citizen science. So definitely check it out and let us know if we can help you. Today, I'm really excited to have Anya Quiros from the Desert Botanical Garden, and she's the engagement coordinator of the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance, also called CASCA. And her role is to empower conservation partners and community members through citizen science to protect our desert habitats in the Maricopa County natural areas. And we really appreciate her being here. She's going to talk to us today about invasive plant species, which ones we need to be concerned about, also what dangers they present to us. So we really appreciate Anya being here. Thank you so much. I'm going to let her go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. I recognize a couple names. Hi Robin. And so I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit about invasive plants. We have May is actually Wildfire Awareness Month. So we have a couple of kind of urgent needs for us to be aware of some of these invasive species. And of course, last year here in Arizona, at least for the folks that are here locally, we saw quite a bit of a bad wildfire year. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but also just take a look at some of the key invasive plants. And for those that are joining, I have a cat that's somewhere. So if you hear it, that's just him playing. But so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. But if you guys have any questions throughout the presentation, like Jennifer said, please feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A. We will be sure to get to all those questions towards the end of the presentation. So let me go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and get started. All right. So yeah, invasive plants in the Sonoran Desert. This is actually a really important topic, especially when we talk about conservation and restoration in the Sonoran Desert. For us, this presentation is part of the Desert Defenders program that we have going on, which is a citizen science, community science program around invasive plants and mapping those invasive plants. So we're very excited to talk to you all today about this topic. So first, a little bit about the Alliance. We are convened by the Desert Botanical Garden, and we're convened by DBG in 2012. We align and unify the efforts of more than 60 partners and collaborating organizations to conserve, restore, and raise awareness for open space in Central Arizona. Our mission is to lead community engagement, collaboration, and strategy to protect, restore, and promote the desert open spaces here in the Central Arizona region. So again, this falls very well in line with what we do and what our mission is. And we have a vision to have a healthy preserve system and a healthy system of natural spaces that promote healthy communities. And so this all ties in together with that. We need to be involved and we need to be aware of what is going on in our natural areas and how we can be part of it for us to have those thriving communities, right? And so this is all in collaboration. Like you've read before, so much of what CASCA does is to bring the different organizations that are in the region towards a common goal. For this particular program, the Desert Defenders program, we work with a whole host of partners. And at this point now, the program has grown a little bit more than the partners you see here, but we work with Maricopa County Parks and Rec, the Arizona Sustainability Alliance, White Tangs Mountain Conservancy, and all of these folks that you see here are working together under the Desert Defenders umbrella, which is again, our citizen science program to tackle the problem of invasive species, invasive plant species in particular. So first, a little bit about where we're situated, right? And you can kind of see up here in the corner, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this is, here we have Phoenix, but the Sonoran Desert where we are is a vast, vast area. And actually our state is the third most, or I think now we're maybe the fourth, but we're the third or fourth most floristically diverse state in the country, and new species continue to be discovered. the Sonoran Desert, which is the yellow outline you see here on the right, is home to more than 4,000 species of plants, which is more than the Olympic rainforest, which is kind of a little mind-boggling if you think about. But we are such a unique location in this little corner of the planet, really. We are believed to be the most biodiverse desert in North America and perhaps even the globe. So again, going to that problem of invasive plants and why this is such an important priority that we have here for conservation is because, and we will see a bit later on in the presentation, but invasive species is a huge threat to the Sonoran Desert and really changing the landscape of the Sonoran Desert, which is such a unique place that we really do wish to conserve and restore and protect. Oh, and that's where we are right now. Little tiny corner of the Sonoran Desert, and it extends all the way down to, you can't see it in this map, but it extends all the way down pretty much to the tip of Baja, California, the peninsula. All right, so invasive species, why should we care? Why is this important? It is estimated that half of all birds threatened with extinction or are either threatened wholly or partially due to introduced species. Now, there is definitely a spectrum of introduced species. We have introduced species that we consider exotic, that aren't harmful to the environment, the natural environment, such as bougainvillea, for example. That is not a native species. It's actually from South America, but we don't see bougainvilleas, wholly infesting our wilderness areas. And then we have all the way to noxious weeds, which is kind of what we'll be talking about today. These noxious weeds are not only detrimental to the natural environment, they're actually detrimental to our economy, which we will just see. So these species, like I said, there is that spectrum, but we're focusing on the noxious weeds, the ones that really do harm our environment and our communities. 42% of all threatened or endangered species are at risk due to non-native invasive species. So again, those introduced species that are not native to the environment and that become invasive. The United States typically incurs 1.1 to even 120 billion per year in economic losses due to exotic invasive species. And that is a pretty big range of numbers, but if you think about wildfire years and you think about the wildfire seasons, we've seen a really bad wildfire years all throughout the nation in the last couple of years. And so really we talk about huge losses, economic losses, when you think about the damage that invasive species can help promote due to their infestations and their overgrowths, right? So here is kind of a little cryptic graph, but this is what we're seeing here is a graph of a study that was done. It's a very famous study at this point that was done on adult desert tortoises. So what we're seeing here on this particular axis is the condition of the species. So basically, how well are these desert tortoises doing in terms of their weight, their growth, and their skin condition and all of these other things. And on the x-axis here, we see the buffle grass, the percentage of buffle grass cover in the area in which these desert tortoises were living. So as we see is that the more buffle grass cover in this area, the decline in the condition of the Sonoran desert tortoises, particularly in female desert tortoises. And so this was a very famous study that was done. And of course, the Sonoran desert tortoises are a protected species. And so this was very important information when we were talking about an impact that an invasive plant, in particular this invasive grass, which is a huge concern here in our state, was having to a key species in the Sonoran Desert. So this is, again, another way in which these invasive plants can affect, again, not only the actual natural landscape, but the wildlife that lives in it. So ecological transformation that happens. So buffle grass has doubled. Buffle grass can double in the amount of coverage that it has every 2 to 7 years, and it has done so since 1988. And when you think about the span of time, that 2 to 7 years, that's actually not very long. So this has a really high rate of growth that it can actually expand in a really fast amount of time, which again goes to that why this is such an important species to be aware about and to control and manage. Of course, native biodiversity and coverage and the density of, again, the native species are the ones that really are help wildlife here, and that wildlife has co-evolved with. All of that beautiful native biodiversity and the native plants that we see here in the Sonoran Desert, that declines as we see the incursion of invasive plants. So we see this rapid transformation in less than 20 years of what used to be native Sonoran Desert biodiversity to basically monotypic, just monoculture fields of buffle grass or other invasive plants, just like such as fountain grass. At this point now, we're seeing a new species of concern, such as stinknet. So again, there's these rapid conversions of the typical landscape that you would see in the Sonoran Desert. So again, that transformation from a Sonoran Desert scrub habitat to those monotypic grasslands or monotypic fields of these invasive plants. So this is why it's so concerning, and why we are really paying attention and devoting money to these noxious weeds. So here are some graphs that show us actually illustrating a little bit of what I was saying. So here we see an uninvaded sort of habitat of the Sonoran Desert. We see all of these different spaced out plants. There is no coverage in between them. They all have spaces for the roots, how we liked it. Within a couple of years, we start seeing an infestation of buffle grass and really start detrimentally affecting the plants and the shrubs that typically inhabit that area. And as we go down and through the years, we see just a complete domination of the areas to where other species can no longer survive or thrive in those areas due to the density of the root growth of buffle grass and other grasses and so on, depending on the species. Similarly, so we're taking a look at buffle grass here, but similarly, we see some of these let me go back here. Okay, so here we're seeing the same thing. Within those couple of years, the density of these plants is really tremendous. Over here in these graphs, very similar to the graph with the Sonoran Desert tortoise and the buffle grass. What we're looking at here is richness. So the species richness, how many different species do we see at Saguaro National Park? This is the rate of the species richness, and this is the amount of buffle grass covered. So very much like with the Sonoran Desert tortoise example, the more buffle grass cover in an area that we see, the decline of that species richness. So we're seeing less species, the less amount of those species in this particular area of Saguaro National Park. And this is, again, a very similar graph from a different study, but once again, it points to that the more coverage of these invasive grasses, the decline in, again, that beautiful native biodiversity that we see in our Sonoran Desert. And so now let's take a little bit of a look at what does our Sonoran Desert typically look like. So if we take a look at this image, it's very familiar to us. We kind of recognize where we are here. We have organ pipes, we have saguaros, we have palo verdes, and of course, some shrubbery, brittle bush most likely. But one of the important things to note here is the spacing between these plants. We can actually see a lot of dirt, right? A lot of patches of dirt that give space to these plants. So we have our typical monsoon seasons. And so when we're looking at this, we realize that even if a fire were to happen, which, obviously, for example, fires because of lightning, that does happen. The way that the Sonoran Desert has kind of evolved naturally is because we don't have a lot of fuel load, meaning we don't have a lot of plants bunched up together that help fire spread. The fires naturally aren't as strong, aren't as large, and possibly aren't as hot, which is sort of a protective mechanism that the Sonoran Desert has to for wildfires. And again, the Sonoran Desert is not a fire adapted ecosystem, unlike the pine forest in northern Arizona, or even the plains of the savanna in Africa, countries in Africa. Fire is not a mechanism that helps plants here thrive. It is not something that has co-evolved with this particular ecosystem. So again, which is one of the other reasons why these invasive plants are a huge concern. So here's another picture of the Sonoran Desert as we know it, a very beautiful picture. So in this picture, we're seeing, perhaps, you might think, oh, but I'm seeing some I'm seeing some plants here that are actually kind of covering the spaces between some of these saguaros and some of these other brittle bushes. And those are our typical annual plants that we see that, come and go every year. But this is just not enough fuel load. This is not enough fuel for fires to continue to spread, especially with the next picture that I'm going to show you all. This next one, you're going to really see what we're talking about when we talk about fuel load. And it really is quite shocking when you compare it to even a full, dense, beautiful Sonoran desert in the spring like this. So here's one picture, and this is kind of zoomed in, but you can see this is buffle grass. This is dried up buffle grass. It's gone through its cycles of its life, and it is now basically just dormant and kindle. It is absolute kindle for wildfire. So if we think about, lightning striking here, you can very easily assume that fire will spread. So another picture here, what we're actually looking at is, again, buffle grass, and it's just so much of it. And again, you could just see if lightning strikes here at this particular moment, how easy it can be for fire to spread. And actually, some of the saguaros that we're looking at right now, on the left-hand side and right ahead of us and here towards the right, those are fire scars that they've managed to kind of outgrow. So we do know that if 30% of a saguaro or more is burnt, that saguaro will die. That is just too much of its tissue for it to kind of move forward. So unfortunately, for example, taking a look at the bushfire area, if you're kind of going up the beeline at any point in time, a lot of those saguaros are beyond 30% burn. And although they have not fallen, they are deceased, essentially, and will expire in the next couple of years. It just takes them a little bit to actually fall. So unfortunately, that's, again, the Sonoran Desert was not adapted it's just not equipped to deal with this kind of incursion of invasive grasses. All right, so kind of diving in a little bit more into wildfire. And so like I was mentioning previously at the beginning of the presentation, we are coming up to wildfire season, as much as I hate to say that. And May in particular is Wildfire Awareness Month. So we're going to be doing a big push around invasive plants and wildfire and just general awareness raising. And so, especially when you consider that, at least based on last year's statistic, 82% of fires are human caused, whether by accident or not. So there is a lot that we hold, a lot of power that we hold in our hands to be more aware about what we do when we're out in our wilderness areas. But kind of honing in on invasive plants and the relationship to fire risk, there is a very significant relationship. But in particular, when we're talking about invasive grasses, so very much like buffle grass, invasive grasses are a huge detrimental, they create a huge wildfire risk in the Sonoran Desert. So here is actually a study from 2019, and so it's quite recent. And they looked at 12 invasive grasses, and not all of these can be found here in the Sonoran Desert. This was a study that was done nationally, but we do see some of the let's call them the frequent offenders here from the Sonoran Desert, which are the P. ciliare, which is buffle grass, B. rubens, which is red brome, and I believe S. barbatus. But for the most part, you can see that there's a general trend here with these invasive grasses, as you can see here on this particular caption. 12 of the 12 species that were tested, 8 showed a significant increase in fire occurrence. 2 showed a significant increase in the mean fire size, so the average size of the fires, and 6 showed significant increases in fire frequency. And so there is kind of almost without a doubt, we're seeing that all of these grasses do create that huge wildfire risk. They create bigger fires, they create more frequent fires, and they just create overall a much higher incidence of having large, hotter wildfires in our area. So I just wanted to show you all this more recent information of tests that have been done. And I mean, when you compare the buffle grass, for example, taking a look at buffle grass in particular, for fire occurrence, there's a big difference. So the light color is the uninvaded areas, and the darker colors are the invaded areas. This is a huge jump in wildfire occurrence. We're not seeing a big increase in fire size when it comes to invaded or uninvaded, but we are seeing a huge, again, increase in fire frequency. So just more information for you all in this presentation that I thought this was very interesting, and just kind of going to the information that we know that these invasive grasses do have a significant impact in wildfire risk. So now looking at a study that was done particularly about buffle grass here in the Sonoran Desert, more localized information. What we're looking at now is desert annuals. These are again, our native species, both annuals and perennials. We're looking at fuel load here. So the minimum fuel load and the maximum fuel load that these species create in the Sonoran Desert. This is what we're seeing here for our native species. Now let's compare it to buffle grass. So this is a huge increase that we're seeing in the minimum and the maximum amount of fuel load. So once again, pointing to that issue of how much of wildfire risk this particular grass, at least for this particular study, how much it actually provides. So there was a study that was done in Tucson and Abra on actual buffle grass fire behavior. And we thought this was quite shocking. And we always talk about this particular study because not only do we want to obviously increase awareness about how buffle grass interacts with fire, but also calling to attention the risk that our firemen crew put themselves at when dealing with these types of fires. So what we're looking at here is the rate of spread, 1.4 to 3 miles per hour, average flame lengths, anywhere from 8.5 to 11 feet. The peak flame lengths, it could be up to 18 feet. And the fuel break that is needed, so again, that space that is needed to actually, somewhat prevent it from spreading is at least 21 to 27 feet. So, a big, apologize for that, I have a separate keyword, but so we do need quite a bit of space there to actually help prevent the spread of this wildfire. And this is just the statistics for that day when this particular study was done. The wind speeds, the temperature, and the relative humidity, which I actually think was a little bit high. All right, and so flame temperatures. So the peak flame temperature of buffle grass was 1650, but mostly it stays within the range of 1400 to 1600 degrees Fahrenheit. Lava flows at around 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. So we thought that was a good piece of information to include. And then here are the melting points of tin, lead, zinc, aluminum, magnesium, and bronze. I mean, these are hot flames. These are really hot flames. And of course, lethal temperatures for living tissue is 145 degrees. And when we think, again, going back to the picture of the burnt saguaros, our cacti species, that obviously that impacts them heavily, which is again why we say that if a 30% or more of our saguaros, at least our saguaros, which is what we know of thus far, they don't come back from that. And that it truly cooks their tissue. It's so harmful for them. And so this is just really, for us, it was really impactful to learn what those peak temperatures are, and just that range of temperatures is for buffle grass. All right, I'm gonna take a little water here, but let's take a look at the priority species for Central Arizona. So the species that we have selected that we're gonna take a look at, which is 8 of them, well, we'll take a closer look at 4, but there's 8 of them that we focus on. They have moderate to severe impact on ecosystems and are found in this region. And so these species this is not a wholly inclusive list of the entire state. For a full list of the noxious weeds, the weeds that have been declared as impactful, harmful, that we cannot sell, that need to be managed, that full list exists with the Arizona Department of Agriculture. I want to say we are lucky, we've been blessed that in early 2020, we finally ended a moratorium on the update of the noxious weed list. That was a moratorium that was set by Governor Jan Brewer, and it had not been updated again until 2020. So that really set us behind in the, let's say, in the authority that agencies and other organizations had to actually go out there and manage some of these species. The reason as to why the moratorium was put, we don't, that's in the past, but, now we have the ability to really help manage for some of the species that weren't included previously. There were some really big offenders. Luckily, we were able to put stinknet, for example, on the list in 2020. So a lot of updates, species that needed to go away, species that we needed to add, and we hadn't been able to do that since, I believe, 2009 or something like that. So a lot of years had gone by. And this list gives people, again, the authority to put money and resources to managing these species, but it also prevents nurseries from selling these species. So, it's an important document to have. It doesn't have a lot of legal teeth, let's say, but it is important to have the support of this list, again, for managers, land managers, to move ahead on controlling these species and managing them. So the first four that we'll focus on today, and we'll devote most of our time on these four today, is buffle grass, which we talked a little bit about quite a bit, fountain grass, stinknet, and salt cedar. And all of these plants that we're looking at right now in the next four are the plants that we are mapping with the Desert Defenders program. And the next four are Sahara mustard, London rocket, common sow thistle, and the Malta star thistle. All right, so we'll kind of go through these a little bit, and just so you are all aware. And again, these are high priority species in our region for us to map, to identify where they are, and of course to manage. And there's a whole host of management techniques that folks apply. And so buffle grass, we've talked a lot about this, a huge wildfire risk. This is widespread in Africa, the Middle East, Indonesia. And it's originally from Africa. It was introduced as livestock forage in the 1930s. And of course, it kind of just got away from us. Originally brought here directly into Texas, Texas A&M, and then from there spread out again for livestock forage. This, again, we know spreads aggressively, and the patches double in size, forming these very dense monotypic strands or of really thickly matted, it's called the bunch grass because it grows in these very matted bunches. Of course, it increases fuel load and fire risk, and it really actually readily reemerges after a fire. This plant is more fire adapted, meaning that, once the fire burns through it, the plant kind of is one of the first ones to kind of pop back up after a fire. The way that most grasses grow is that the center from which the plant grows actually exists about an inch under the soil. And so which is again why when we mow our grass, it very easily grows back, because that's not, it's kind of the root. And that particular part of the grass is called the crown. The crown of the grass grows underneath about an inch under the soil. So when a fire burns through, it's very, it is much more fire adapted. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service named buffle grass as the foremost threat to the desert tortoise populations due to the changes in forage, the temperature, and fire frequency. So we saw that graph when we were talking about the desert tortoise, and we saw how the incursion of buffle grass really does harm the condition of the population of desert tortoises. And so here we're seeing a picture of a different kind of, it can take many different shapes, but what we're seeing here on the left-hand side is the flower head of buffle grass. And one of the very distinctive features of buffle grass is the rachis, which is actually the piece of buffle grass, the piece of the part of the buffle grass flower where you can see all the attachments of these little flowers. So this part right here is the rachis. And the rachis of buffle grass is quite indented, and it almost feels like you're running your fingers up and down a zipper. But this is what the flower head of buffle grass looks like. And as you can see, it's already beginning to let go of these different seeds, right? So this is flower head of buffle grass that is seeding. So already we're seeing potential buffle grass seedlings have gone off into the wind. Wind dispersal is one of the methods of spread that buffle grass has. And you can see, you know, all these different seed heads. They range in color from purple, brown to straw colored once it starts getting older. So again, this is a perennial, so it's not an annual plant. It continues to live year after year. That can grow up to 3 to 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. So it's a very big plant. It can be a very big bunch grass. The flower heads are really brush-like, plump, again, that brown to purplish when it's fresh, and then it moves and transitions into more of a straw color as we're seeing here. Has profuse branching as it gets older, and it continues to grow from the same base, right? We're talking from the crown. So it becomes even more and more bushy as it gets older because it just keeps growing from that same crown underneath the soil. And again, it gives it that name of bunch grass. It blooms from July to October, although I will say that some of these timings are very variable. This plant is quite opportunistic, meaning that as soon as we see some precipitation, as soon as we see some rain, particularly now in the spring, we're going to see buffalo grass begin to bloom and even begin to flower, which, you know, again, speaks to the nature of these plants and why there is that spectrum, right, of introduced to noxious weeds, the speed and the ability it has to adapt and to just spread, right, and to take advantage of the natural environment and the fact that it has no natural predators. So the habitat in which buffalo grass can be found, it can be found up to 3,000 feet. It is widespread in disturbed habitats along the roads, trails, and washes. We often see it in vacant lots, agricultural fields too, depending, again, those grazing areas. But it does prefer to grow. One of the things we've noticed is that it does prefer to grow upwards. If you're ever at Payastoa Peak, and you're, you know, hiking the summit trail or anywhere around that mountain, and you take a look up and you see that golden tawny color that we saw from the pictures at the beginning with the burnt saguaros, that is most likely buffalo grass, which again speaks to why it's so hard to manage. It likes to grow in every nook and cranny, and it just keeps growing upwards and upwards into the summits of a lot of these mountains that we have around here. So again, we'll talk a little bit, look at stages. And this is actually a good example of what we talk about when we talk about bunch grasses and how they continue to grow. So you can see here, this is relatively new growth, very brown, starting to kind of get purple in color flower heads of this buffalo grass, growing from the exact same crown with already dead or matured leaves that it had. So these will grow, they will flower, they will go through their cycle. And once again, the next year, we'll see the same green growth. So over time, these become very dense, very matted bunches of grass that just, again, continue to spread and grow. So you can imagine 50 of these. The management of these plants is extremely difficult. So we keep going through that cycle. They get more flower heads, they keep getting bigger. And once again, they go into their seeding phase, which we can see here. The lighting is a little difficult, but we can see that kind of like that picture we saw earlier, it's already beginning to let go of the seed heads that had developed. And once this spread, we see a lot of them here in the surrounding area of this photo. Fountain grass, this is, now we're going still in the grass family. And again, the grasses are some of our biggest priorities when it comes to management. They are the ones that spread quickly and create much higher wildfire risk, fuel loads, particularly when they dry, right, and become sort of just basically kindle. So this is actually a grass that we can still find in landscaped areas. It is now on the noxious weed list, so we can find it. Hopefully, you have never seen this recently in a nursery. But we see a lot in landscaped areas. Honestly, it is a beautiful grass. But unfortunately, it has just completely escaped cultivation and, like I said, landscaped areas, and now just infesting our beautiful open spaces, our natural areas. This picture here is actually of a wash in Tonto National Forest. And I mean, just as far as the eye can see, it prefers it likes being closer to water than buffle grass does. It does tend to like more precipitous areas, which is why we see it a lot in washes. But again, very similar to buffle grass. This is a prolific seed producer and it spreads rapidly, again, from cultivation, from our landscaped areas into nearby disturbed areas. And then, it moves further and further and has done so. And it is now just prolific in our wilderness areas. There are some nursery varieties which are considered sterile, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But really, no variety is recommended for landscaping. So, if you do live in an HOA that happens to, have this on their list as an accepted plant species, I encourage you all to have a conversation with your HOA and just let them know, what the truth is, what the reality is of this plant. Fountain grass can also form very dense stands, outcompeting native plants for resources, very much like fountain grass. And I mean, we can see the example clearly here of how dense these stands can become, especially if it's unimpeded. And very much like buffle grass, it is highly flammable and increases wildfire risk as well. And very much like buffle grass, it has these tufted. It is a perennial bunch grass. It can grow up to 5 feet tall. The flower heads are very pink and showy, very beautiful, brush-like appearance. They also sort of merge or just kind of transition from these dark purple to lighter in color until they become basically tawny golden in color as they're seeding. And again, there's a couple of varieties. Some are more purple than others, but they're all sort of fountain grass. One of the differences between fountain grass and buffle grass, if you can see here in this particular picture, for example, is that they have very long, very narrow leaf blades that have a little bit of hairy edges and arise from the base of the plant. So unlike buffle grass, which can sometimes remind folks of almost Bermuda grass, which is very messy, very thick, leaf blades. Fountain grass is very manicured, which I think is why folks use it for landscaping, but they have very narrow leaf blades and they all come from the base of the plant. You're not going to see, leaf blades coming out from the stem. All of these are actually leaf blades. All of these are leaves. And it blooms again from May to October, but very much like fountain grass, like buffle grass and most of these invasive plants, very opportunistic. As soon as we get some rain, you're going to see some of these starting to green up and then start shooting out their flowers. The habitat of fountain grass. In natural areas, it mainly occurs in washes. So like we saw in the previous picture of Tonto National Forest, riparian areas, grasslands, and of course, undisturbed roadsides, and some rocky outcrops, some cliff and canyons, particularly close to washes, but and can also grow up to 35,000 feet. So we can find it up into higher elevations as well. Very pretty grass, but we do have, in my opinion, we have a lot more native beautiful grasses that we can possibly replace this with, particularly again in some of those suburban, urban areas in which we tend to see this at. So we'll just quickly go through the stages. Again, a perennial bunch grass growing from the same base. So you can see the previous growth here in the back, and now it's just from the same crown of that grass underneath the soil, we're seeing the new leaf blades come up. And again, that purple, really pretty purple color, and they're going to transition into a more golden color until it's seeding. And once again, releasing all that seed through wind dispersal. So a note on red fountain grass. The Arizona Nursery Trade recognized the noxious nature of fountain grass by 2010. The Arizona Nursery Trade has self-disciplined the sale of red fountain grass, which does not go rogue in the wild. Up until now, we have not found it. It is often called, and so this is the Latin name, the scientific name, Pennisetum cetaceum variation, VAR, variation rubrum for red, right? This is supposedly a sterile variety. I know that Michael Chamberlain from the Maricopa County Cooperative Extension Office has slowly begun to do some research. I don't want to say he is. I know he's very interested in this and has begun to slowly gather some information about whether or not this is truly sterile. But again, like I said earlier, we really don't recommend fountain grass as a landscaping option. There are a whole host of species that are less prone to become invasive, even though we haven't seen this in a while in the wild, and more native species as well that are perhaps less known about. Purple Thrion is one that I really think is beautiful. It's a little smaller, but very beautiful as well. Purple Thrion is a native species of grass that we have here that looks very similar to like a baby fountain grass. So just, plant native is kind of the I think the moral of the story here for this. And for some reason, when I give this presentation, I get to this slide, I always remember Jurassic Park and the quote of nature finds a way. And so I just, we don't know. These plants just want to reproduce. They want to thrive. And so we just don't know what they're going to do, right? Stinknet. Oh, stinknet. This has been a topic of discussion for the last couple years. If you don't know already, this is a particular invasive plant that has truly become just front and center of a lot of the conversations around invasive plant species here in Arizona, and I know also Southern California. So this is a native to, and I'm sorry, that's actually a little bit of a mistake here. It is native to South Africa, not Eurasia, and we're learning more about it. And it is now Oncocyphon pililifer, which is the correct taxonomy name, and you don't have to worry about this. They change all the time, as it was before Pililiferum. But it is native to South Africa, and we actually don't really know why it was introduced. So I do apologize for that. We know that the first sightings, the first sort of information that we were getting about this plant truly kind of running wild came from Riverside County and Orange County in California. And they really started seeing an explosion before we saw an explosion here in Arizona. We've traced it back to that area in California. We do not know where it came from, why we found it in California, and there's still a lot we don't know about this plant. If you're interested in learning more about stinknet, I will definitely put a link in the chat after this to Michael Chamberlain's talk on stinknet. It was a fabulous, fabulous talk about this plant and the latest information that we have on it. In 2017, we saw an explosion of this plant in central and southern Arizona. This species was thankfully added to the Arizona Noxious Weed list in January 2020 when that was fully ratified. And this plant is just prolific. It is an annual, winter annual, we say, because it starts germinating in November-ish timeframe. It is an annual herb with numerous small flower heads, very bright yellow, and also sometimes golden, half golden spheres. A lot of people confuse this to be a relative of chamomile, and they call it sometimes glow of chamomile because it does kind of have some similarities. We discourage the name glow of chamomile because it does give folks the impression that they're related when in fact they're not. They both are in the Asteraceae family, the sunflower family, but they are not really that closely related. And do not try this in your tea. Do not try to eat this. It actually has been found to be very caustic, to cause allergies. Even burning this is very harmful to people that have respiratory sensitivities. And so it has very erect stems. It is sparsely covered with stiff, slender bristles. The stems and the leaves are very strongly scented, which again gives it that name stinknet. And this tends to bloom and again, these times are now quite variable, but from February to June. And I would shift that even more to December to maybe around May. So this, very much like the other species that we've been talking about, is very opportunistic. As soon as we got some moisture in the past last year, towards the end of the year, we started seeing this plant germinate and grow. And I believe some of those species are probably flowering now if they haven't already started moving into their seeding phase. Oh, excuse me. So very, very tough challenge because of how fast it grows. It is found on roadsides and disturbed areas, river bottoms, agricultural areas, riparian areas. Oh, I'm sorry, folks. Basically all over the place, and can be found up to 30,000 feet, and I believe even higher based on some of the information that Michael Chamberlain was giving us. So again, I would really encourage, if you are interested in learning more about stinknet, to take a look at his talk. He has a lot of really great information about this plant. And so some of the stages, again, I wanted to show these to you all because they can be sometimes a little difficult to identify. But one of the telltale signs that I always tell folks, if you're able to, if you don't, if you're not sensitive or you think you might not be sensitive, to very cautiously approach the plant, try to smell it, whether by getting close to it as much as possible and smelling it, or if you feel comfortable, just with the tips of your fingers, your index finger and your thumb, just slightly pressing upon the leaves and then smelling your fingers, you will almost immediately get that turpentine smell, and you will recognize, oh, this is stinknet. These are some stinknet seedlings that we have, so it can be very hard to distinguish when they're small like this versus some of our native species. Sometimes they can be confused with Amsynchia, which is some scorpion weed. We also can get these sometimes confused with our native poppies, which can sometimes look a little bit like these. But again, even at this small of a stage, you can smell that turpentine smell. And again, we start seeing these big bolts coming out of the plant as soon as it starts getting a little bit in height and a little bit in size. And then immediately we start seeing the bolts produce these tiny little flower heads. And then, we start seeing that distinctive yellow flower head. And then once it's gone through its full cycle, this is what it looks like when it's dry, which I think is also very distinctive. If you look at a field and you see this copper color, this sort of rusty color out in the distant landscape, you almost instinctively know that is stinknet, that is dried up stinknet, because there's nothing quite like that color when it's dry, at least that I have noticed. So again, this also provides kindle. It is also a fuel load, although we don't know how much of a fuel load this provides and how much of a fire risk this is. We just don't have enough information yet. But we do know that it does contribute. And actually right here in this photo, this plant that you see here is most likely red brome, which is one of the grasses that is heavily infests certain areas in certain parks here in our region. And so over the last couple of years, particularly last year and into 2019, we just saw this being shared all over the news, and how much this was it just exploded, and it really caught people's attention. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I think it's very important for us to be aware that we can be advocates for the right kind of information. We saw a lot of folks, for example, this headline on Instagram, a lot of people taking, oh, look at this pretty flower. We saw it being sold in farmers markets as wild chamomile. And, there's just so much information out there that perhaps not all of it is correct. So we were really excited to see how many people kind of jumped on the wagon to really inform folks that this is an invasive plant and this is a really dangerous threat that adds on to the already other threats that we have for our Sonoran desert. So I just wanted to call attention to how much news this plant got, and I thought it was great to see the different media want to have a good take on this and what this all is, what's going on here. And so, yeah, I just wanted to call attention to that. I just wish that some of our other plants like fountain grass, for example, that can still be found quite prolifically in our landscaped areas, got a little bit of attention like this, because that one's probably a little bit easier to manage in our landscaped areas. And then the last one that I want to kind of focus in on today is salt cedar. This is kind of a little bit different plant than our grasses, but it is still very important to be aware about. This is native to Eastern Europe and sort of temperate Asia. Tamarisk escaped cultivation, and so this is like a larger shrub, a tree shrub. It escaped cultivation in the mid 1800s. It was actually originally used to line the railway, railways for wind control and to help with wind. And of course, then afterwards, it just completely got out of control. This is an extremely invasive plant in riparian areas, and completely, pretty much almost to some degree in some areas, completely replacing native vegetation with just dense thickets. And I mean, you can kind of see This is a baby salt cedar, which almost looks like a little pine. And this is a full grown, well, not full grown, but a mature salt cedar plant. And you can see just how dense it is when it actually grows. So you can imagine just one after the other, how dense thickets these form. And the reason why this one, I wanted to highlight this plant is because of the relationship, how it changes the native landscape and our typical Sonoran Desert landscape. It not only obviously crowds out native species, but it changes the geomorphology. It changes the groundwater availability. It changes the soil chemistry. And of course, it changes, fire frequencies and the plant community composition. And of course, then having detrimental impacts to the native wildlife diversity. I'm sure if you haven't already heard of the Southwestern Willow Flycatcher, which is a very cute little bird that used to heavily rely on and co-evolved with our native cottonwoods. They used to use the cottonwoods to nest, and the Southwestern Willow Flycatcher is a protected species, federally protected species. So as salt cedar came and completely displaced these plant communities like our cottonwoods and our willows, it now the bird kind of just did what it had to and started co-evolving and evolving into using salt cedar as its nesting places now. So what this does is that puts our land managers in sort of a debacle where there are times where we can't manage for salt cedar because we know the bird is nesting and we know that it's going to be found in these plants now. And sometimes, and I was hearing from a colleague saying that now, more than likely, Southwestern willow flycatchers are going to use salt cedar over cottonwoods and willows, even if they have willows and cottonwoods there available to them as we make our restoration projects. So it's become a huge, kind of dilemma, right? And how do we manage this? How do we, if we were to treat an area, for example, we can't wholly remove all of the tamarisk because we know it's valuable nesting area. So again, it just creates this huge sort of debacle. And again, going to these other things, the groundwater availability, the soil chemistry, these plants, very much like eucalyptus, are allelopathic, meaning that they secrete essential oils that change the soil composition around them to benefit them and to benefit the bacteria and the microbes that they want and to help them thrive. But of course, these aren't ones that are adapted to the Sonoran Desert or weren't here before. So, really changing the landscape in ways that perhaps other species might not, or maybe they do, but we just don't know about. And not only that, but these are very thirsty plants, extremely thirsty plants. The amount of water that salt cedars take up, I forget the statistic, but it's just hundreds, just gallons and gallons of water that they're taking from our Gila River, from the the Salt River, and again, just having a big impact in our just native local habitats. So a couple more pictures. Again, it can grow into these sort of tree-like structures, also just dense thickets. It is a shrub or a small tree. It can grow up to 16 feet. To be honest, I think these flowers are beautiful. They're tiny little white to pink petals. They grow in these narrow clusters. Their leaves, if we look at the previous slide, are small and almost scale-like. So if you kind of look at these leaves here of this young salt cedar, that's kind of what the leaves look like even as they get older. And it reproduces by seed, by root sprouts, by stem fragments. So this again, speaking to the nature of noxious weeds, of invasive plants, they grow so vigorously. That's one of the key tactics, right? Whether it's wind dispersal, whether it's by root sprouts or stem fragments, this plant is also one that thrives and really has many different ways in which it can reproduce and continue to spread in the landscape. Now we're also, I don't have a slide about this, but we also have the Tamarisk beetle that is now being found in Arizona. So in an effort to control this plant, we released a form of biocontrol, which was in the form of a beetle from Asia that loves tamarisk, and it will eat a dense thicket of tamarisk like it was nobody's business, which is, you would think, great. But again, going back to that issue with these Southwestern willow flycatcher, we're running into this issue where as soon as it's here, land managers are going to be in a very tough spot of, we have this beetle that is eating the tamarisk, which is great, but it's also eating the area and habitat in which this federally protected bird species is supposed to nest. And we're not recuperating fast enough. It's just happening a lot faster than we thought. And in reality, folks didn't think that the beetle was going to get further south than Colorado. They didn't think it was going to thrive in such hot weather as here in Arizona. But of course, again, we just don't know, right? We humans, we try to do something, and very much like these invasive plants, and they just get a little bit out of hand. So I don't know if you guys can see my cat's tail. So yeah, just another tidbit about this plant, and I think I can find a really good article that was recently published last year about the Tamarisk beetle, and I can put that in the chat as well. This plant blooms from January to October, and again, you can see these little flowers, what they look like. The elevation or the habitat of this particular plant, it is definitely a riparian plant. It grows below 500 feet along streams, irrigation ditches, both alkaline or saline soils, but very much in those near the waters. And like I said, our Gila River, our Rio Salado, you can definitely find it in those places. Okay, so in summary, and like I said, there was other species that we didn't talk about today, like Sahara mustard, London rocket, which you can very much find in your neighborhoods, and some of those thistles. But I didn't want to overwhelm you with plant information, but I'd be happy to share more resources if you are interested in learning about those species. We have a booklet for desert defenders, which explores every one of these species that we highlighted. So in summary, invasive plants decrease biological diversity. They convert our Sonoran desert habitats. They increase fire risk, and they produce those negative economic and recreational impacts. But an important ecological note, invasive species are not inherently bad. They are in fact very important in the habitats in which they evolved. One of the things that I always want to avoid is, the term invasive species is used just as a common, jargon to an extent, but, I don't want to give that idea that they're evil or they're invading, or, it was us humans who brought them here. And so it's just an unintended, unfortunate consequence. But again, the plant itself is doing what it does best. It is thriving, it is growing, it is reproducing, and they're not inherently bad. They're just in the wrong place. So now what? And so we need a plan to manage for invasive plants in our preserve systems and our open spaces. And that plan starts with a map. We really need to know where these species are, what's their movement like, where are they growing? And that's really where you all come in, where citizen science, community residents come in to really help us with this effort. As you guys can kind of start to get the picture, it is a huge problem. It is a very big challenge. So we do really need the help of the community to help us. So this is where citizen scientists come in, where they help us map and photograph the priority invasive plant species, like some of the ones we just saw. They help us with ground truthing. Sometimes we have older information, older data that says this is where we know the species is, but of course these are living beings that move and shift and grow. So it's one of the huge benefits of using citizen science is that it allows us to ground truth the information and really know what's there. It gives us more detailed mapping. With this program in particular, we're using GIS apps to help us map this data. So we have that more precise information about where these species are. And then, our hope is to really, and we slowly are, increasing our relationships with municipal departments and the park departments to help develop IMPs, invasive species management plans. To actually develop a strategy. How do we get at this problem? What are the areas that perhaps we want to protect that haven't seen an invasive plant? Maybe we need to focus on that first, and so on and so forth. So this is really what our vision is with this program as it continues to grow. And just in general, with the information that citizen scientists give us and help us collect. So what is Desert Defenders? And I've briefly talked about this, but it is a citizen science program to identify, to map, and remove top priority species in central Arizona. This program trains volunteers on identifying these plant species and how to map these species using an app by using the same maps, and going back to all the different logos that you saw on the screen, by using the same maps, the same training, this unified front, we really do hope to inform land managers and park staff to make the most informed decisions for the management of these priority species. And so here's just a snippet you guys can see of the app that we're using. This is an iPhone screenshot of what the app looks like on your phone. And you can see, this is actually an old picture. We have a lot more point data now. And this is the public facing web or desktop version of the map that we're using. And again, all of these points have been gathered by citizen scientists, myself included, but we go out there, we track the trails, we look at the species, what's going on. And I believe blue is buffle grass, yellow is stinknet, and there's a legend here which is being blocked out, but we have this public facing map. And again, this is again to really help us, where are these species going? What are we seeing year after year? And it's just really important for us to have these shared citizen science efforts. And it's just so critically important. This is a much more recent picture of the map. You can see just how crowded it is, especially these certain areas that we see here. A lot of stinknet out in the West Valley. I think stinknet all over the place, really. But there were particularly a lot of stinknet that was mapped over the last year or so. And we're really trying to get even more point data. We really need more information, particularly you think of Phoenix. South Mountain is basically no points have been gathered there. I think it's very similar today still. A lot of Estrella that still hasn't been mapped. And of course the North Mountain Sonoran Preserves area. So we're really working with City of Phoenix this year to help these areas get mapped. But you can see there is a huge impact that is made. We now know what is being found where. And again, going to that vision that we have, that this is a tool, we hope it is a tool for municipal departments to use. We do a lot of outreach and education. Now wildfire has become sort of one of the key things that we do spread message on and really raise awareness on. Why is fire in the desert so detrimental, especially to our cacti species? And also, what can we do? You know, how can we be more fire safe? We're slowly starting to develop a partnership with FireWise, which is a training program for communities to become more wildfire prepared. And we hope that our Desert Defender training can actually become one of the classes that communities can take for credit so that they can become FireWise certified. So we're looking forward to that. But we also, of course, social media, which obviously I encourage you all to follow the CASCA, both Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But we also have just materials, what are these desert invaders that we're looking at, brochures on stinknet and how to manage. And so we're really working with partners to make sure that this information is available and at our different municipal parks and just in general online as well. Another way to get involved, so we do have an official Desert Defender training that we give, but we recognize the enthusiasm of the residents in the community at large. And so we do have a Desert Defenders project on iNaturalist. Obviously, it doesn't require training, and given the process that iNaturalist has, where things can become research grade, we opened up this new sort of platform for folks to join the effort and help us map invasive plants. So up until now, we've had 10 species, and again, those are sort of the species of concern that we're focusing on. Over 4,000 observations, and this was just earlier this afternoon. But if you're all interested, because we do offer trainings at a certain intervals. In the meantime, if you guys are just really anxious to get out there and map some of these species, I really encourage you to join iNaturalist and the Desert Defenders Project, and just going out and observe, where are you seeing this in your neighborhoods and the like. And so I think that wraps it up for me. Thank you all so much for listening. I know it was a lot of good information. This is recorded, so you can watch this again, but I can definitely put some more links up and be open to your questions. So let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. All right. Oh, Jennifer, you're muted. Let me go ahead and.
Thanks. There are some questions that have come in.
Yeah.
One question, how do you actually go about the removal? Like how are these noxious plants removed? How quickly are you able to remove?
All right, so that, it depends. So residents, if you have this in your yard, one of the things that I encourage is getting out there as early as you can. Basically, especially with stinknet. The younger the plant is, the easier it is to remove. And then especially with stinknet, it is an annual plant, meaning once you remove that individual species, you've eliminated that seed bank, basically, that one will potentially create. There's obviously, this is not my area of expertise, but there's obviously chemical control that you can apply as a resident, Roundup, those kinds of things. There's also some more organic methods that folks can try to use. I know that they're not particularly helpful with buffle grass, but again, it's manual removal, getting out there and just kind of digging it out. Now, in terms of the and I recommend the Maricopa County Cooperative Extension Office. They're a wealth of just wealth of information on all those kinds of things for removal. On the wilderness side of things, when we're talking about large landscapes of just infested areas, we typically rely on chemical removal and just chemical applications, and then maybe following up with what we call spot spraying, and then we go into manual removal once the area is small enough. I mean, I was shocked when I first started kind of learning about all of this to know that Saguaro National Park literally uses a helicopter to just kind of dust spray, whole hillsides in Saguaro National Park of buffle grass. It's kind of like the area has become so, just completely overrun by buffle grass that even if there is a native plant, at that point, just take our losses and try to clear the area so that then native plants can slowly start coming back. We do have 2 successful cases down in Tucson by John Schuring, who's a fantastic person. He's a volunteer at this point. He's retired with the Arizona Native Plant Society, that has managed to successfully decrease the amount of buffle grass coverage to like 3%, less than 3%, in both Waterman's, which is a mountain range, and Ragged Top down in Tucson, 2 mountain ranges. He did use chemical removal, but he used very precise controlled application using volunteers and licensed applicators. It was about 8 or 9 year long battle. So it is something that is a continual effort. But I believe in 2018, we started seeing the resurgence of our native annuals. So it does just take a little bit of time, but if we're willing to put the effort in and take care of, again, strategize to take care of one area, we will see that slow decrease in the invasive plant species and slowly an increase in those native plants. And so again, there's obviously a lot of volunteer efforts, the weed whackers and such, that are hugely helpful in taking care of certain areas. But when you talk about just 30 acres or more, then you kind of start thinking about what's, you're going to have to take your losses and your gains in there and really try to strategize as to what the best methods are. So again, chemical removals are sometimes heavily relied on when you're talking about those big areas.
Okay, like that would be like in that wash area, would they try?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you need to apply, like I said, pesticide 8 times, 10 times until it finally gets to a point where you can just slowly manually remove the little things that come up here and there. Yeah.
So so are there different partners doing different things, or are you all trying to do it together as a group?
Yeah. And so very much we are sort of dividing and conquering. We are working together because we do understand, and very much going to the mission of CASCA, we do believe that collaboration is key. So we all need to know what each of us is doing. That way we can strategize and have better best practices, better information all around. But as you can see, the partners are kind of all over the place. We have the White Tanks Conservancy. They're very much invested in protecting that mountain range and doing the work in that sort of area, that side of town, for example. The McDowell Sonoran Conservancy in the Scottsdale Preserve, McDowell Sonoran Preserve, they have been working on fountain grass, buffle grass removal for many, many years. And we really kind of took their lead. And they are been, taking care of that mountain range. So again, it is sort of that partner effort of City of Phoenix is going to try to manage, and we're supporting City of Phoenix, and all of us trying to slowly hit at the different areas. I think the first foundation is the gathering of data, and then slowly supplementing that with removals in areas that we know could really use that push and that help. So definitely all kind of working together in terms of the reporting and keeping each other in the loop, but we all kind of have our different processes for doing all of this work. Yeah.
So people can find, if they want to be involved, they can go to the Desert Defenders website and get the training. Is it online now, or are you doing it in person? How's it working?
Yeah, so we now, and we will recently make the Desert Defenders training virtual public for anyone who wants to take it. The other side of that, which is the identifying of invasive plants and using the iNaturalist project. If you want to become involved using the Collector app, which is our GIS-based app, we hold hiking surveys. So actual surveys that you can come and join us, learn how to use the app that we are using, and help a particular partner to map that area that they're doing. So we're doing that a lot with City of Phoenix and the Arizona Sustainability Alliance. And if you want to become involved with in the Scottsdale area, we heavily encourage you to become involved with McDowell Sonoran Conservancy. If you live in the West Valley, the White Tank Mountains is doing theirs. So, we're kind of all pieced together. But yes, I definitely recommend y'all keeping in touch with the events that are up on the website for Casca. We will just, in a couple of weeks, make the DD training kind of public to everybody virtually. And then we'll follow up with events on surveying and mapping. Mm-hmm.
Great. And one question was, did the grasses originally come from the ranches? Is that how they were brought?
Yeah, and so that's what we think, particularly with buffle grass. The Fallon grass was brought here as an ornamental plant. Again, it's a very beautiful plant if you see it. That was brought here for a completely different reason, but buffle grass was brought here for grazing, and it did escape the ranches that we had, and then into, BLM land, state trust land, which is also used for grazing, and then, just completely out of control. Mm-hmm.
And then, so a good way to begin is with the iNaturalist app.
Yes.
If you go there, there are help screens. We also do a lot of programming on using the iNaturalist app, and you're welcome to contact the library if you need any help with that. We have a lot of people that like to use it. We can help you with that. If you're looking for the mapping map, the other one, that one we recommend the training.
Right. Yeah. If you want to kind of get a little bit deeper and really help with the program with the GIS app, that takes a little bit more training to know how to use the GIS app. But sort of an introductory for everybody, go ahead and use the iNaturalist. If you really start liking this and really get into the invasive plants, obviously feel free to contact me, but keep in touch with the website, and we'll be putting those different opportunities for getting more training on the GIS app. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with the iNaturalist, you do make an account, and then it keeps track. It's sort of like a social media, but for people that like natural things. It's kind of fun. People will help you identify things. They'll help you. It's a great product. Last question. Can you, this is funny because we were talking about this before we started. One question was, could the grasses be controlled by using animals like goats?
I know that is what we're talking about, goats. I know goats can be used to some extent. I believe they like buffle grass, but definitely I think when the case of biological controls, we try to be careful, right? When we talk about, for example, the Tamarisk beetle, it's not going to go down below Colorado. It's going to eat all the tamarisk. It's going to be fine. And now we're like, oh no, it escaped. What do we do? So we do tend to be careful. Although I have heard of folks using goats in their own private, they have acreage, using goats to get rid of some of these grasses. So yes, definitely a tactic. We just have to be careful with it.
Yeah, because I actually had gone through in the library and looked to see what kind of resources we have. And we do have books on invasive species. And one of them was controlling, it's a children's book, but it's about how they do use goats to control invasive species.
And I see one, are there any invasive grasses from home or commercial landscaping? And that would be fountain grass, for sure. That's the one that has escaped. We brought it here as an ornamental. But yeah, so definitely a lot of different ways. We can't take ourselves out of the equation, right? We're part of it. We're humans. We're in the mix. And we're making these things happen. So we just have to be careful with that. One plant that I do know that goats do not like is stinknet. So unfortunately, as much as we would like it, the goats just do not seem to like it at all. So unfortunate for us. But that would be a good one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Nice. But in that one place with that wash, maybe the goats could be let go.
I know. Yeah, it's really like impactful when you see some of these images and you realize all of that shouldn't be there. That's a wash. There should be water there. Yeah, or at least under subsurface
Yeah,
water. But
sometimes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I really thank you for doing this for us. It was fascinating, really, really helpful. And I can't wait to, I'm actually on the Desert Defenders on iNaturalist, so I will make sure I have seen that Tamarisk at some of, in Gilbert. So,
Oh,
and I
good.
have taken pictures down at the, where the water exchange station
Oh, yeah.
is down in South Gilbert. So I will continue to map that. And you guys monitor that and just are aware so you can let people know.
Yeah, so for the iNaturalist app, we do routinely monitor that, and of course, eventually we export all that data and compare it to the points that we have on the map that I showed you in the presentation, and make sure that we have the full coverage of what is being mapped there and on the iNaturalist app.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, and thank you to all who came. This has been recorded, so you can check it out later. It will be on the Maricopa County Library District website as a on our our recorded programming. It's also going to be available on the Desert Defenders on their YouTube channel. So check it out and refer people to it if they need information. And we really appreciate you being with us, Anya.
Well, thank you so much. And it was great seeing folks that I've seen before. And again, yeah, we'll have all this up on our YouTube as well eventually. But thank you all so much for having me.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.